Welcome. I'm Andrew Braddock. I'm Dean of the Cathedral, and it's a great pleasure on behalf of the Cathedral to welcome you all to the Western Room this afternoon for this formal launch of the Norfolk Anti-Poverty Alliance. One very practical notice to start with, which is if the fire alarms do sound, the main exit is behind you. Go down the stairs the way you came in, and the gathering point is just on the grass over here on the upper close. Thank you. As a cathedral, we're particularly delighted to be able to provide a venue for this event. As I look out across the room, I see representatives from all kinds of different groups, organisations, the City Council, faith groups, but coming together this afternoon with a common concern and a common cause to tackle issues around poverty in our county and beyond. And it seems to me that we are people of goodwill who are seeking to come together to pool our experience, to pool our expertise, so that together we can make even more of a difference to the lives of those that we seek to serve and indeed to work with, importantly, as well as to work for. So I'm delighted to welcome you all here. I'm sure we're in for a really interesting afternoon together, and even more looking forward to what will emerge out of this work of collaboration to tackle poverty and the issues that cause poverty together. So it's my pleasure now to introduce David Powles, CEO of the Norfolk Community Law Service, who is going to be hosting and leading us through our time together. David, thank you.
Good evening, everyone. We always seem to start these events with fire exits and toilets. So just to say, if anyone, we want to keep this quite relaxed. So if anyone does need to go out or just sort of take 5 minutes or whatever, please do. Toilets are the ones used by the cafe at the back, so you just exit the door down the stairs. As Andrew said, my name is David Powles, CEO of Norfolk Community Law Service, and I'm the host for tonight's event. Thank you so much for being here today. It's an absolutely fantastic turnout as we launch something truly important, an initiative that aims to help address a growing issue in our community, poverty. The reason we're launching the Alliance today is simple, but it's also urgent. Too many people in Norfolk are going about life's essentials: food on the table, a roof over their heads, a warm, dry home, basic human needs. Yet for far too many people, these are out of reach. The Alliance is a movement for everyone who believes we can and must do better. We hope that after tonight it will become a coalition of organisations, including charities, social enterprises, faith groups, community groups, food banks, statutory partners and everyday people, united in tackling poverty in Norfolk. We know there are plenty of these organisations across the county all doing wonderful work to help people in need where they live. The Alliance isn't about trying to replace or replicate their work. What it is about is trying to bring it all together, to make sure we share problems and solutions, good practice and bad, to make sure we campaign together for the things that really matter, to try and ensure we're one voice for the good of the people of this amazing county. Together we are stronger, and together we hope to work towards solutions that make a difference. So where did the Alliance come from? The story begins with two key events that highlighted the urgent need for action. First, back in autumn 2022, the Norfolk Community Action Network, or NCAN, declared a cost of living emergency. This was a wake-up call about the crisis people were facing in Norfolk, and the strain it was placing on charities and organisations that support them. This was a clear signal that more needed to be done. Second, in the summer of 2023, we saw the publication of the groundbreaking Hunger in the UK report by Trussell Trust. The report revealed that 11.3 million people across the UK were experiencing food insecurity, meaning they couldn't be sure they would have enough food to eat at some point during the previous year. In Norfolk, we know that big number is reflected in our own communities. It's not just an abstract figure, it's our neighbours, our families, our friends. These two forces, the cost of living crisis and the rising rates of food insecurity, are what brought the Alliance into existence. And while it's hard to believe that this movement didn't already exist, we're now here ready to take bold, coordinated action. So what do we want to achieve with the Alliance? Poverty is complex. It's not a single issue, so there is no single solution. But as an alliance, we want to see real, urgent change. So we know we have to start somewhere. So we have a clear focus and a few key goals. These will of course change as the alliance develops, and hopefully all of you will add your voices to the campaign. First, we believe that many of the solutions to poverty lie in Westminster. That's why one of our key aims is to influence policy at the national level. Specifically, we want to reform social welfare to ensure that benefits actually provide enough money to cover the essentials of life. We cannot keep using benefits as a political tool. People need the security of knowing they can meet their basic needs, and we are committed to pushing for that change. Second, we know that Norfolk doesn't receive enough funding from the national government to fully address these issues. But we also know that we have resources right here in our community. So we will take a closer look at what we have in Norfolk. Are we using our funding and services effectively? Are there gaps, duplications or wasted resources that we could address? Could organisations be working together more efficiently? Is it right, for instance, that Norfolk councils don't even have an anti-poverty strategy? Maybe we can campaign for that to change and to put poverty higher up on the agenda. We want to make sure that what we have here is being used to its fullest potential. And thirdly, we're committed to ensuring that the voices of people with lived experience of hardship are heard. These voices must be at the heart of everything we do, because they are the ones who truly know what needs to change. A year or two from now, we hope to look back and see some real progress. We hope to say that the Secretary of State heard from the people of Norfolk that benefits were too low, and that we've helped to fix it. We want all of our MPs to understand that poverty is a top concern for people in Norfolk, and that this drives them to push for change. We want to have identified and addressed gaps in local services, and we want to see more people with lived experience of poverty speaking out, campaigning and making sure their voices are part of the solution. The Norfolk Anti-Poverty Alliance is about making a real lasting change. It's about working together across sectors, across communities and across political lines to build a Norfolk where no one is left behind. Tonight is the start of it, and we look forward to hearing from our guest panellists before opening out the debate to you guys for questions and comments. Thank you for being part of today. We look forward to working with all of you to tackle poverty and to make Norfolk a place where everyone has access to life's essentials. Right, thank you very much. We're going to start now tonight by hearing from Jade first. I'm just going to give you a little bit of an explanation as to who Jade is. Jade is the head teacher of West Earlham Infant and Nursery School in Norwich. She has worked in education for the past 22 years, of which over a decade was spent in the classroom teaching in the early years in Key Stage 1. She has always had a strong passion for supporting children with additional needs and supporting their families. Since moving to West Earlham Infant and Nursery School in 2019, she has learned an incredible amount about the impact of deprivation and poverty on the child, the family and the wider community. She says she's in a fortunate position now where she's able to put support in place to the best of her ability for the community she serves. Jade, over to you.
So thank you for having me here. It is a real pleasure to be involved. So that is a rather pointless slide I put in the presentation. Can you go on to the next one, please? Can you go on to the next slide? Thank you. So, just to give you the context of the school, we are in the heart of the NR5 community, which is just next door to UEA. It is an area of significant deprivation, which I'll tell you about. We have had a report done which is based on data from 2019, and I'll be able to get the new data later this year, but what it did show us is that 94% of the children on roll, so it goes specifically on my actual pupils, live in the top 30% of deprivation in the country. And when I read that, it blew my mind, because that's nearly all of my children. And 71% are in the highest 10% of deprivation in the country. Now, what we know about children and their development and what the implications of poverty and deprivation does to them is massive. Is what we know is this is about a 10% increase on the 2015 data, and I anticipate to see a similar increase when we get the data come through later this year. To give you a little bit more context about my school, we have over half of our children are what's classed as pupil premium, which kind of doesn't correlate with that, does it? And I questioned that today, like why are they only able to access additional funding even though they're living in absolute poverty? I don't know the answer to that. 19% of our children have special educational needs, which is way above the national average as well. And something which we see in our school that is really becoming a strong theme is the medicalisation of poverty. So the impact of poverty, parents are often thinking, well, there must be a reason for why they behave like they behave. And that's something I'm really keen to understand and explore more, because are we medicalising poverty? Is it becoming the norm that we're saying, okay, there must be something wrong with these children, but actually it's because of the way they have to live, because of the family situation. I find that really, really interesting, because it's what we do know about children is the symptoms of ADHD and autism actually can be very similar to trauma-based experiences. And I think that is awful. So next slide, please. When I knew I was coming here, I did an anonymous survey with my parents, so I wanted to hear their voices. So what it did tell us is 98% of our families cannot afford to buy the food and drink that they would like to, and all they need. 94% cannot afford their gas and electric. 44% of our families, we've got an in-house school food bank, and I rely on a lovely little man who volunteers for the food bank to drop me off a parcel every couple of weeks. 44% of our families have used that, and 54% have been referred to the main food bank. And it was the comments that got me. When I read the comments from the families, it just causes so much stress on the family and mental health, but feeling like there's no way to change it. Our families often tell us they feel powerless to make change in their lives. Clothes and food in general is hard to keep up with the cost of living, and I have to borrow every week. It's hard to afford the cost of living, and for a person who can't work with the childcare, the amount of universal payment, credit payment, is not enough, and we always have to skip some essentials, food, clothes, even if your children cry. What an awful feeling as a parent to not be able to give your child what they want. And it's what we see regularly is parents cannot make ends meet. Next slide, please. So in school, what does this look like for us? And I'm fortunate I can bring sort of an education perspective to this. So it started, David and I linked together when we did an article that went into The Guardian about what we see in school, which is children with bowed legs, children with rickets, children with vitamin deficiencies. It would appear that you land yourself in hot water if you speak about things like that, and I have no worries about that. So in school we are seeing a high number of children who are regularly poorly, and that can be because mould growing in the home, poor living, the stock housing in our 5 isn't brilliant, but we do see attendance is a struggle. More parents are reporting the quality of housing. I have so many parents come to me saying, "Miss Hunter, look at the mould growing up my walls," and I even got on the phone to the council and they tell me they'll send a leaflet out, but that's not okay for little children to be breathing that in daily. Parents struggling to provide food, access to services, and this is something that really blows my mind, because we know families that live in deprivation really struggle to access, particularly services in the early years. Consistency is what our families need. They see a different midwife every time or a different doctor every time, and that brings about a whole other barrier that puts them off of going. And it was only yesterday I actually marched over to the GP surgery and said, "I need 4 appointments today." I got them, but my families couldn't get them. That's not okay. Why? Because I've got a badge on and a different job. Why can I get them but they can't? But that's for another day. We see parents with really poor mental health, and we see children with really poor mental health. I've got 2-year-olds I'm putting into a form of therapy because they're traumatised by their experiences already. They're 2 years old. We are working really creatively and collaborating with as many different services as we can to try and bring services into school, because parents will access it if it's in their safe space, which is our school. And that's going well, but it takes a lot of time and a lot of energy to get things going the right way. I invest heavily in my own speech and language therapy team. Children need to be able to communicate, and the vast majority of ours, when they enter our 2-year-old room, I think the last year's cohort, we had 84% of our 2-year-olds significantly with underdeveloped language. Now, if that poses a whole other barrier, because they can't keep themselves safe, they can't tell us what's going on, they can't express themselves. So I invest heavily in that, because the wait list for NHS is far too long. And in school I have a full-time family support worker who is always mega busy, but it's what she's really good at, is reaching out to loads of different charities, services, to advocate for our families, to really put that support in place. Next slide, please. So what are we doing about it? And that's got my most notes on. So the first bit is consistency. We're really consistent, and I can be really annoying as well to people who don't respond to me. And I know I can be that annoying person, Tracy. So the things we do, education. So we have got enhanced provision at our school. Our universal offer to our children and families is vast, and we work really hard to build it and adapt it to meet the needs of our community, not just the need of education, but the need that presents to us on a yearly basis. We have 2 additional classes for special educational needs. We put on Babylon Babies groups, Talking Toddlers groups as another way to reach our families. I'm starting to offer parents placements, so I can give them a reference if they were looking to get into employment. And we work really closely with business in the community as well to give children experiences that will open their eyes to the world outside of the estate. And if we keep doing this regularly, drip feeding it in, it will just mean hopefully they'll aspire to something a little bit more. We've just had an outstanding Ofsted, which was lovely. I don't pray to that whole thing because it's a bit too political for me, but it was lovely to have our practice recognised. Is what we do is a really good job at educating our children. Our children get to the national standards by the time they leave us, and we're really proud of that. We have the music service coming, which sounds silly, but our children don't experience the joy of music a lot, and that was really important to me, so we play steel pans and lovely things every week. For the families, we put on lots of courses, so we had air fryer courses, slow cooking courses, English, maths, understanding the child's behaviour and emotions. We're trying to skill up our parents, and we have a really good uptake on those as well. And I invest in my staff. They've got to be well trained, and some of them come tonight, which is lovely. But we invest heavily because it's not just me, it's got to be all of us doing it. So that's a really quick snapshot of what we do. I hope that was kind of what you guys were not expecting to hear, but you got it anyway. But it's what we see is we are dealing with the impact of poverty every single day, and it's not getting easier, it's getting harder and more complex, and the layers are building for every single family. And it's what it takes is I can do my job, but if we all come together, we can do more. So that's what I'm hoping. And the last slide is when we all had a good drink after Ofsted in the staff room, drinking champagne out of some kids' cups. But it's all that is, that's the team that makes it happen every day. It's not just me, it is a team of nearly 50 of us. But that's it from our perspective, living it, doing it every single day. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jade. Just worth me saying, once everyone's done their presentation, we'll get a chance to ask them some questions. So please do kind of have a think and remember some of the points that Jade's made. I've had a great sort of hour and a half, 2 hours in company with Jade, and it's so inspiring to see the work that is going on at the school. And just really that the school's kind of gone, you know what? This isn't someone else's problem to solve, this is our community, this is our problem to solve. And I think that's really why we wanted Jade to speak tonight, because I think it's that kind of inspiration that they give around kind of let's just get on with it and do something and do what's right. So I'm going to introduce our next speaker, Sumi Rabindrakumar. Sumi leads policy and research at Trussell, a charity that supports a network of more than 1,300 food bank centres across communities in the UK. Together they provide emergency food and additional support to people locked in poverty and campaign for change. Previously she worked for the single parent charity Gingerbread, focusing on social security, employment and child maintenance policy. Prior to this, Sumi worked for the children's charity Karam and the Audit Commission on Local Service Evaluation. Sumi. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can everyone hear me? I've got a slightly cranky phone next to my horrible children. Thank you very much for inviting me. I was just saying how when I first joined Trussell a few years ago now, the first time they let me away from the desk to meet some food bank leaders was actually here in Norfolk, so it's nice to come full circle. You heard a bit about Trussell already, so I won't go over that. But I thought I'd talk a little bit about the wider context we see and the kind of part that you are playing within that bigger picture of hunger and hardship that we see across the UK, and a little bit about the sort of change that we want to see right across the UK. And I think to start with, kind of what we see, our first sort of red flag of what's happening in our communities is our data on emergency food provision. And the last year that we have data for, we provided over 3.1 million emergency food parcels for people across the UK. That was a record level, and that figure has grown over the last few years. Obviously, the pandemic and cost of living crisis has accelerated that need, but actually it's been growing before that as well. So this is a long-term, persistent issue that we are seeing in our communities, and it just shows the scale of the challenge that we need to sort of tackle it and turn the tide. One of the first things that I always say when I talk about our emergency food parcel figures is that it's always the tip of the iceberg, because there are so many other providers beyond the Trussell community of food banks that are doing similar things, providing similar support, social supermarkets, pantries and so on. But actually what our data shows and our research shows that it's actually the vast majority of people who are food insecure or are facing hunger or have income so low that they can't cover the cost of essentials don't get any support from any charitable food provision. So when we are thinking about that sort of end goal of ending poverty or ending the need for food banks, we have to think about beyond just sort of reducing the numbers of people coming through the doors, as brilliant as that would be, but thinking about that need that we don't see, that isn't visible in our data right across our communities. And what we want to see is that it's not about sort of just reducing the number of food parcels going out, but it's making sure that genuinely everyone in our communities has the financial security to be able to put food on the table, regardless of where you are, whether you're in an urban or rural environment, whether you're having to face the kind of standard life shocks that we all face, like a job loss or separation. Those sorts of things shouldn't put us in the kind of hardship where we can't afford food, where we can't afford our rent or clothes. And that's what we see every day in our food banks. And so we've carried across that principle of that sort of that foundational thing about financial security across to the work that we prioritise at Trussell. It's one of the reasons we launched our Guarantee Our Essentials campaign, and you can see one of the table across in the corner, that was gathered some of the community views about what hunger and hardship looks like in the community here. And that campaign is really about looking at what the foundations and building blocks that we need to see a future where we don't have the need for food banks. And at its heart, we think at Trussell is that the social security system should be the bedrock of that future. When we look at our data, we know that food bank need is about a lack of income, it's not about a lack of food. And the kind of biggest and most immediate driver of that lack of income is problems with our social security system. And so we launched this campaign because we wanted to kind of kickstart some momentum and some appetite for change, so that we can embed a principle within our social security system where it at the very least protects people from going without the essentials. There's lots of things that our social security system should do, help people into better work and so on, but kind of at its very basic level it should at least be doing that, and at the moment it's not, and that's why we see people in food banks. And so what we're calling for with this campaign is an essentials guarantee, and that's kind of got two parts to it. So one part is introducing a legal minimum into our social security system. So at the moment the way it works is you get a basic payment, standard allowance, but actually that basic payment can get swallowed up by deductions to repay debts to often the government because of overpayments, or taking out a loan to cover the 5-week wait fee for some credit, or to pay energy suppliers if you're behind on the bills. And so that basic payment gets swallowed up in those deductions before you've even tried to cover your outgoings, your standard bills for the month. So what we want to see is a guarantee that in our social security system you have a legal minimum payment that cannot be reduced. And that would be set in legislation. It would be a real shift in the kind of protection that people get from the social security system. The second element of that, of the essentials guarantee, is the essentials part. So at the moment, the way social security payments are decided bear no kind of resemblance, have no relation to what the actual cost of living are. And we think that that doesn't make sense. It feels like it's a sort of common sense thing to do, to look at what costs that payment should cover and then decide rates based on that, based on actual living costs. So we're calling on the government to introduce an independent process to decide what our basic social security payment should be. Taking some of the politics out of that decision, and using the cost of actual bills to determine social security payments. And so those two things together, a legal minimum based on actual cost of living, is what the essentials guarantee is all about. And we've had a petition, it's 150,000 people signed a petition, took it to Downing Street. We've been talking about it a lot with politicians and with the DWP and lots of parliamentarians. We've had loads of local communities across the UK kind of signing up to the campaign and taking part and bringing their local voice and frontline expertise from schools, from the health sector, sort of all joining the call of why we need a social security system to do its duty, to play its part in tackling hunger and hardship. And we know it's an ambitious ask, but it's the sort of thing that we think any government that's ambitious about living standards should be considering. And so we've seen some sort of progress. So the autumn budget, the government announced a fair repayment rate, which was about kind of introducing stricter limits on the amount of deductions that could be made from social security. And so kind of the takeaway from that was it's not the full essentials guarantee by any means, but they were obviously listening to some of the arguments that people and communities were making about the need to have a basic level of payment that isn't kind of clawed back to repay debts and so on. And it's kind of one of the reasons why I wanted to flag that sort of concession in the budget around the fair repayment rate was because it's kind of microcosm of the landscape that we're in at the moment if we're trying to collectively call for change and tackle poverty, which is that there is a government that has shown signs of listening. It's talking about tackling child poverty, it's talking about delivering on living standards, and it has a manifesto commitment to tackle the dependence on emergency food, is its wording. So on the one hand, there is some movement there and there's some appetite to listen, and hopefully that translates into the environment that you're all working in and campaigning in. On the other hand, there are these very significant restrictions about how much they're willing to move around the fiscal environment. I'm sure you see it locally in terms of public service budgets and local budgets. You already talked about it in terms of the amount of funding coming to Norfolk itself. That is all tightening the purse strings and limiting kind of the conversations we can have. So we're having to be more creative about thinking about what are the sort of incremental steps that we can make which would allow us to progress towards a better future. But we also don't want to lose sight of those ambitious goals that would really be transformational, like the essentials guarantee, and like I imagine lots of other things around health and education, and so on. So I think one of the kind of messages I wanted to leave you all with in terms of some of the kind of lessons that we're taking away from our work and advocacy at a UK level is really just the importance at the moment of showing how central your goal is around ending poverty, tackling poverty locally, is to those wider ambitions, because it's important obviously for people, and that's what we care about most at Trussell, for people themselves, their life outcomes, their children's life outcomes, but it also matters for our communities, for our public services. We can see how much hunger and hardship is bearing down on our education system, on our healthcare system, and we can see the effect it's having on our economy. It means that people are pushed further away from work. If you're cold, if you're hungry, you're not able to travel to work, you're not able to do the training you need to move into work, you're not able to progress. more that we can do to kind of show how central what we do in this is, because I think the easier it is that we'll see some change.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sumi. Ruth Stokes did a really good job tonight pulling the panel together, and I think it's fair to say it's been quite deliberately done. And I think, obviously we wanted to inspire you guys, hopefully go away with some new knowledge and kind of make that call to action. But I think in terms of Trussell, obviously nationally, a tremendous organisation that's had a real impact over the last few years. So that's why we kind of chose those tonight. But also locally, I think that very much what we can learn from Trussell is about flexibility. So I've done lots of stuff over the years with Norwich Foodbank, who obviously their prime purpose has been to provide food, but over the years has changed to offer advice and to work with lots of people and organisations in the room here. So I think that's sort of one thing to take away from Trussell is, don't necessarily just stay in your lane. If there's a problem that needs solving, just as Jade School has done, just kind of go and try and fix it. So our next guest is Anna Sweeting. Anna is a research fellow for the Norwich Institute of Healthy Ageing and leads their co-production partnership. Having worked in policy research in the third sector, she is passionate about bridging the different sectors to ensure research is embedded in the local community. Anna has experience of engaging underrepresented groups, including those involved in the criminal justice sector, vulnerable young people, and individuals with mental health and learning difficulties. Tonight she will be talking about her work on the Cherish Partnership, a project which aims to find new ways of doing community-led research about healthy living. Anna.
Thanks, David, and thank you for the invite to speak tonight. I'm here with the Cherish group, with the Cherish team, and I hope I do you all proud as I speak and just share. I was really pleased when I found out that incorporating the lived experience voice of people living with poverty in Norfolk was one of the aims of the Alliance. That's something that myself and Sarah, my colleague at the university, are really passionate about, and if we're honest, we haven't done particularly well in the academic world in the past, and it's something we want to change. And hopefully, through this last project that we've done recently, called the Cherish Project, that we have done it differently. The Cherish Project, as David mentioned, is a project we did in partnership with Norfolk Citizens Advice and Charles Burrell Centre, looking at creative ways of engaging the community in healthy living, rather than some of the traditional methods that we usually use. But we wanted to ensure that the lived experience was incorporated throughout the project, that we're kind of coming to an end on now with this project. And so we set up a lived experience advisory group, and that advisory group are here tonight with me, which is fantastic. But what we wanted was people from the communities that we were reaching, some of the most deprived communities in Norfolk, that really represented the communities and could speak on behalf to make sure that we design the research appropriately and kind of in a fun, hopefully exciting way. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to give some examples of how we did it as a team. I know that looks different for everybody, but hopefully there's just a few examples or snippets that you can take away that maybe you could incorporate into your organisation or service or whatever it is that you're delivering. So the first thing that we did was a training session that Liz, who's also here, designed, which was absolutely fantastic. Because when we invite people into our work, into our world, it's often full of acronyms, systems, all sorts of things that mean lots to us in our little small bubble, but don't to the other people. We could just go back one slide a second. Brilliant, thank you. So what we did was we asked people, well, what made a good and bad researcher? And that's those lovely pictures there. But in the team, we had an incredible mechanic, Michael. So we started thinking, well, what does research look like for Michael? And we also had an amazing fisherman, Mark. So what did that look like in terms of fishing? So we were trying to use the language of the group. Next slide. Another thing we did was the group really helped us turn our incredibly boring university documents that we're really quite good at into much more fun looking ones that you can see on the right there. Mark designed the Cherish logo, which is brilliant and on everything. But not only did they help us make it look nice and colourful, they also told us what needed to be in there, because we have a tendency to make detailed, kind of very long documents. But what did the community want to hear? And they helped us to really cut down the information and to provide kind of the essentials. But also there was somebody in the group who isn't able to read and write, and they were able to really advise us on how they navigate documents such as this through pictures and through sharing that. And then next slide. Next slide, please. This last slide I just wanted to share because I think often I find that people are a bit worried about how to engage people with lived experience in their work or in their services. Or worried that actually so much is already going on in their lives and that actually it could be yet another burden for people to consider. That is not the case. That is not the feedback that I've received. And this is just some of the feedback that the Cherish group have given me. You know, they've said things like, this made me feel heard, this made me feel important, or I've never been asked what I thought before. And this picture of team I just wanted to share. Somebody drew this during one of our groups and said to me, Anna, they say there's no I in team, but there is. Look closely, there is. And he was so right. And he was just saying that actually, although we are a team, that individual voice, that individual experience is really important to capture. So as part of the Cherish project, one of the things we asked people in Thetford, Great Yarmouth, Norwich, was if you could speak to the government about one thing around healthy living, what would it be? And nearly all the answers came back to poverty. And those answers are on some of the postcards at the back. So we would love you to come and talk to us, read some of those postcards, introduce yourself to the group later if you'd like to. Thank you.
Thanks, Anna. I think, again, your involvement is really sort of sums up exactly what this is about, because there's so much stuff that goes on with the UEA, but also I think it's a massively untapped resource for so many organisations. And you know, I know there are lots of organisations in the room, Norfolk Community Law Service included, who do stuff with the university, but who knows what else could be out there that might help sort of tackle some of the problems that were talked about. So thanks ever so much, Anna. So our final guest tonight, then we're going to kickstart with some of the questions and get you guys involved. Lord John Bird. Lord Bird was born into poverty and brought up in care. His life journey has included spells as a prisoner, artist and printer. Now an activist, publisher and crossbench member of the House of Lords, Lord Bird is the driving force behind the Big Issue Group, which includes the world's most successful street magazine, Big Issue, and its social investment arm, Big Issue Invest. Lord Bird is a business leader with an outstanding record of using enterprise as a force for social change in dismantling the root causes of poverty. And in Parliament, he focuses on poverty and homelessness prevention. Lord Bird.
Thank you very much. I was going to say, what do you want me to talk about? Poverty. It was interesting when I was explaining to our colleague Ruth that, and she didn't even know, that I got into the House of Lords by applying. And any one of you over the age of 23 can apply to be a member of the House of Lords. You have to go through a process, and they only pick 2 or 3 or 4 a year for the crossbenchers section, which is where I am. But I applied. I said, no, I want to volunteer for Parliament. I want to volunteer. I don't want to be chosen by any political party, because I've worked with all political parties, and I can tell you, I've been seriously harmed in my work by the Labour government, and helped. I've been seriously harmed in my work by the Conservative government, and helped. And even the coalition, God bless them, who caused more grief than any government since probably the 30s. But the point is, I went in because I wanted to dismantle poverty. That was the only reason I chose to go into Parliament. When I got into Parliament, I found there were hundreds of peers and hundreds of members of Parliament who wanted to talk to Johnny Bird and say, you know what, I've got this project in my constituency or in my area, and it is all about the emergency of poverty. And I would say, great. great. That's really marvellous. Excuse me, I've got to do this. As you can see, I'm perfectly formed. I'm 79. But unfortunately, the only thing that's wearing out is this. So I had all of these people coming to me and saying, can you help me in my emergency? Can you clear the homeless people who are sleeping in Westminster Station? And I said, look, you get on with the emergency. And what I will try and do is do something that I don't see anybody else doing, which is trying to turn the tap off that creates poverty. That is a long and hard and mentally dangerous thing to even consider. The idea of stopping another generation of people inheriting poverty like I did. It was incredible why a slum boy born into a London Irish family in the slums of Notting Hill, where you shared a toilet with 8 other families, and if you wanted to have a crap, you had to book it 2 days early. Those were the kind of conditions. No food. A very, very unreliable set of parents who would rather have a drink and a fag than look after their kids, and we all ended up in local authority. Well, brought up by the Church of Rome, the Catholic Church. Anyway, the predictability of poverty, the predictability of failure, which comes from the inheritance of poverty. And what I went into Parliament to do was to try and turn the tap off. I got a bit lost, I have to say. I tried a number of things, and it was painfully obvious that everyone agrees with you. If you stop an MP or stop a member of the House of Lords and say, what do you think of poverty? Oh, it's terrible. Yes. Anyway, I'm a bit late. I'll see you later. I'm popping down the pub or something like that. No one ever takes poverty seriously, because when they do, they only want to deal with the emergency. If you keep dealing with the emergency, then you're going to have another emergency. Because unless we allocate our resources in society to dismantle poverty, to move people out of poverty, to train people away from poverty. Is that all right? I'll tell you a joke in a minute. Sorry, I should say that I'm one of the world's worst show-offs, because I love nothing more than an audience. Anyway, so I went in to dismantle poverty. One of the things I realised, of course, and I'm sorry, I hope I will be relevant to today's discussion, because I will get round to the need to support the emergency. When I looked at poverty, and I looked at what was happening, what was really wonderful was the fact, or wonderful for me to realise, was the fact that governments always take the same shape. They all, whatever political nature of the parties that win the election, they always take the same shape. So they have a DWP. They had their, the prison service and all sorts of things like that. And all of these operate singularly, and largely they operate independently, almost hermetically sealed from each other. And every government does the same thing. They have some kind of what you might call a project of trying to bring all of the people together, so that at one stage of the week or the month or the year, they're trying to work together to do things like dismantle poverty. 8 government departments deal with the crisis of poverty. And what I did, and it's led me now to have a bill going through the House of Lords that has a snowball in hell's chance of succeeding, is to create a Ministry of Poverty Prevention and Cure. We have to break the problem of having so many people caught in poverty and more people joining. And I've seen it. I assure you that when I started the big issue 33 years ago, we dealt with homeless people, we dealt with all sorts of people. We were not dealing, as we are now, with the people who are the working poor. Even people who are on social security 33 years ago, it worked better than it is worked now. So anyway, so we have to find a way of turning the tap off. So I'm in the House of Lords going on about turning the tap off, and I'm calling for the creation of a Ministry of Poverty Prevention. It has no chance of becoming legislation because this government is thinking in the same manifestation as the last government and the government before that and the government before that. So anyway, here I am coming to you because I'm inspired by you. I'm inspired by what you've done. I'm inspired by the fact that at last we get something which is very, very grown up. And that is to bring together, the alliance, bring together, there's a posh word that I use, concatenation. I think I'm the first person in the House of Lords ever to use it, and they all had to rush to their dictionaries. Concatenation is joining things together so that every one of you has a link, so that by converging your energies, you can begin the slow, deliberate process of trying to dismantle poverty and not just leave another generation and another generation who are suffering from the immediate problems of not being able to feed their children, and added to that those people who have inherited poverty and who will be stuck in poverty for much of their lives. So anyway, so I've got this bill that's going through, but the other thing that I've tried to do is I've incorporated into the bill something called PEC. PEC is Prevention, Emergency, Coping and Cure. This, by the way, isn't a party political broadcast, so you can all disagree with me. Prevention, Emergency, Coping and Cure. That covers everything that we do. Do we prevent poverty? Do we deal with the emergency of poverty? Do we deal with the coping of poverty? Do we deal with the cure of poverty? And I am trying to get Her Majesty's Treasury to do something it's never done, which is when it issues a pound of social support, a poverty pound, where is that going? Is it going into preventing somebody falling into poverty? Is it going into the emergency of poverty? Or is it going into coping with poverty, or is it cure? Imagine a series of, I wish I had a slide, I'm not so good at those kind of things. Imagine a slide, imagine a series of circles. The first circle is very small. That's the amount of money that they spend on prevention. The second circle is a bigger circle. That's what they spend on the emergency of poverty. The third problem is coping, which is holding the hands of the poorest amongst us, but never giving them enough to get out of poverty and never really giving them enough to feed their children. And that is enormous. That is about 90% of the money spent on poverty is just holding people fast. And if there's any change in the cost of living because of things like the Ukraine war and all sorts of things, who gets it in the neck but the people who are stuck there in poverty because nobody is enabling them or allowing them or encouraging them or supporting them to get out of poverty. And you imagine the smallest of small circles? That's the money that Her Majesty's government spends on cure. I know we're in a church circuit. There's a term that immediately came to my mind, slightly rude, if I'm allowed, just slightly rude. Jack shit is spent on prevention, and jack shit is spent on cure. And most of it is spent on just holding people's hands. And as we've seen, as we've listened, inadequately, because there's never enough money. Anyway, do you want to hear a joke? Can I tell you a joke? Because I'm sorry, I just love telling jokes, and then I'll shut up. Isn't that all right? There's a bloke what rushes into a shop. I've got my wife and my daughter sitting in the front row. They've probably heard this about 150 times. So. There's a guy rushes into a shop, and he says to the manager, he says, where's your camouflage jackets? And the manager says, they're good, aren't they? That was Ken Dodd's joke. And I said, can I use it? Because I was interviewing him, and he said, yeah, he said, but you have to give me a joke. And I said in my best Liverpudlian accent, I had a wonderful experience when I was a very young man. I was banged up with a lot of people from Liverpool, and I used to go around there trying to talk like that and all that. So I said, did you hear about the Liverpool version of Silence? They're doing a Liverpool version of Silence of the Lambs. And Ken Dodd said, yeah, what's it? He said, shut up, yous. I sometimes get laughed. Sometimes I get told off by people who actually speak Liverpool. But anyway, let us get back to, I feel very privileged that you're here and that what you want to do is build this community that dismantles poverty. I'm very, very pleased. My wife is working with the University of Liverpool on a project. And the greatest piece of common sense I have ever heard came out of her mouth when she described to me what they're doing in Liverpool. The NHS is supporting the Citizen Advice Bureau. Because the council can't afford it anymore, they're putting money in. Why? Because if you have a Citizen Advice Bureau, you can help people pre-health problems, or if they've got health problems, help them so that they don't get worse. So what the NHS is doing is thinking, let's be clever. Let's use wisdom, community wisdom. They're using cleverness, and that's what we need. When you go to your doctor, I haven't been to the Norwich and whatever hospital here, but I used to live in Cambridge, and I spent time talking to doctors down there, in the A&E and all that. And I would say to them, who's coming to the hospital? And on average, 50% of people who present themselves in hospital, and this is according to the BMA, are suffering from food poverty. It is the most devastating amount of money. 40% of every pound the government spends in its 1.12 trillion money, 40% is spent on the damage created by poverty and the collateral damage created to society by poverty. We have had poverty alliances all over the country. We have to bring in the Trussell Trust. We have to bring in the Citizens Advice Bureau. We have to bring in the local law businesses, the law groups that are helping. We have to do all these things. The big issue itself is transforming itself more and more into being a part of the community rather than just around homelessness, but getting in and helping people to bring about some change. We got involved in a project back in 2018, 2017. We created something. We went to Northampton, and we went in there and we created something called Social Echo. And what it was the most simple thing. We got an estate agent, you know, anybody, put all your hands up if you love estate agents. no hands up. We got an estate agent buying the services of a housing association. The housing association wanted to expand because 70% of the people in social housing were not in work, and they wanted to create more jobs. So what we did is we put the two of them together, and the estate agent had to buy They had 150 buy-to-lets. They needed the grass cut and the fences repaired, and the Housing Association could do that. We got the NHS to buy 9,000 loaves a month from a bakery, and the bakery was made up of largely women who had been sexually abused, physically abused, suffered from domestic violence and all that, and a number of them could only work for a couple of hours or a couple of days a week. But when the NHS got behind it, it became an institution in the community. And we tried to do this. Unfortunately, as with most of these initiatives, you have to get the right people, and if they move, then the continuity goes. But anyway, I'm just telling you that idea of social echoing, of the idea that every one of us needs to learn to maximise together what we can do. This is the future. And I'm very, very glad to say I now live in Cambridge. I now live in Norwich, largely because of my daughter here at school here. In spite of appearances, I'm a very young father. I have to stick that in. Anyway, God bless you all. All I'm going to say is this is a momentous moment for me, because I can see, just by looking at you and by listening to you and listening to what's been said tonight, that it really is a beginning of turning all of our energies into a convergent, a concatenation. Thank you.